We can't tell you how frustrating it was for us to upload our podcast when we first got started. The websites were clunky, we had data limits, and it was all so confusing. That is, until we found Zencastr. Zencastr is an online platform built for podcasters to not only upload their podcasts, track their listeners, connect their audience, and so much more. Zencastr plans have no upload or download limits, so your cost won't grow as you do. Embed their player that automatically updates to show the latest episode of your show. Zencastr lets you see your podcast downloads along with your traffic, website, and Google Analytics. Zencastr also supports multiple podcasts under one account. The best part is, if you already have a podcast on another platform, you can switch to Zencastr with a one-click importer, all free of charge. So what are you waiting for? Head over to howtomakeapodcast.co/Zencastr to start saving time and money with your podcast today. Hello and welcome to How to Make a Podcast. My name is Nick Miller and I am so excited to talk to you all today. I have my good friend John Bunn here with me, co-hosting as he always does. John, how you doing today?
Nick, if I was doing any better, you'd have to punch me in the face. That's how good I'm doing, just to bring me back down. No, I'm doing great. Things are good.
I'm sure we can arrange that.
No, thanks. It's been a big week for How to Make a Podcast. We did a couple things. Number one, we passed 5,000 downloads last week, which was huge. And we did it in 13 episodes, which is also huge. And it's kind of a milestone episode. We're 15 episodes in. So all good things. How to Make a Podcast is rolling. The podcast blueprint. People are excited. It's a good life we get to live. How are you?
Yeah, no, I'm doing really good. This podcast is going really well. Currently, we have some stuff going with our How to Film Weddings community in that group, and it's moving along, going really well. My personal business, things that we just launched a new website, kind of a rebrand update for our wedding film business, me and my wife's, and I don't know, I'm just in a good place. My brother and his wife just had a son last week, and we're actually driving up to Kansas City tomorrow, so I get to meet Mr. Benjamin Socrates. That's his name, Benjamin Socrates.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, they are calling him Benji, so we're gonna go meet him tomorrow. I don't know, it's just all around really
And
good.
Before we hit record, Nick said he could feel his top abs now.
It's true. It's true.
Like he's been eating healthy and exercising on his journey to being the healthiest dad at 40 ever.
Yeah. So I still have like 14 months, but I'm getting, you know what? How I've done with my workout life, I say by January 1st, I will be in the best shape of my life. But this year, like in 2021. And then I have until November to just like,
you're going to be yoked. We're going to look back at this video.
Flex and my shirt will just pop off. Like that. That's what I want.
You're going to be like Hollywood Hogan. You're just going to rip it open. I made a wrestling reference, and you're so happy about this. Nick, this has nothing to do with how to make a podcast, but I love it. Maybe our fans think it's fun. I don't know.
Or maybe they don't like us. But anyways, so this is our 15th episode for How to Make a Podcast, which, it's not that many, but as John and I have kind of looked at podcasting and what other podcasters have done, we have noticed that between episodes 15 and probably 25 or 30, kind of somewhere in there, that's really the point where we perceive a lot of podcasters failing. And it's kind of after 15, 20 episodes that you kind of run out of new ideas, kind of run out of topics, kind of run out of things that, what do we talk about? What do we do? And so this is kind of the hard part of it. You know, the first 10 or so episodes, you're really running on adrenaline. You're so excited to get going. And then you move into this part and you're kind of like, man, I guess I'm going to keep doing it, but you're not as excited about it. So
it's kind of like, it reminds me of if I were like the Pilgrims back in the day, and it's like, we're going to America, we're going on a trip, it's going to be awesome. And you get in the boat and it's like all exciting. It's like everybody's there. You're like waving as the shore is going away, you know, like the people on the shore, you can see them. And then like you get into the trip a little bit and you're like, I don't even know what direction we're going. I'm a little seasick. I haven't walked on the ground in a long time. I'm just a little discombobulated. That kind of feel where it's like, is this worth it? Should we be doing this? Do you want to turn around? Do you want to stop? And that's kind of, the topic for today. We're talking about when most podcasts fail. And like Nick was saying, somewhere in this time, like you can no longer see the shore anymore. You're kind of just like, okay, we're out here. The excitement is worn off, and it's at this point where we see a lot of people quit. And we want to talk this episode about a lot of reasons and ways to break through that, what's important to break through that, and what to be thinking about as you have set sail and you're no longer near the shore. So.
Right. And if riding in a boat, in pilgrim times in the 1500s, if 1400s doesn't make you be like, oh yeah, I can relate to that. Think about driving cross country and you have a 10-hour trip from Kansas City to Denver, and that 3 hours, 4 hours in the middle of Kansas where it's just flat and boring. And I live in Kansas and I know that it's just flat and boring. Okay. Like you're like, Okay. So that's where we are. That's kind of, after you get so many episodes in. And so there's a few things that we want to touch on before maybe we can kind of break down some ways to help you so that you can keep moving forward and so that your podcast doesn't fail. The first thing that we want to talk about is having some sort of community of people. And we believe that it is super important to have some sort of group, some sort of community that you can reach out to and bounce ideas off of and help you, because whenever you commit to anything, and especially something that's going to be a long haul thing, like you say, I'm going to do a podcast and I want to potentially have sponsors and make some money and, make this a job for me. Whenever you commit to that, it's going to get hard at some point. That newness is going to wear off. And that's where having a community is really helpful and encouraging. A community that we have built that we know that you as a listener can really get into is our How to Make a Podcast Facebook group. We have, how many people do we have in there now? Like 3,000?
3,500.
3,500?
3,500, yeah.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, I know, which is crazy. But it's people that want to make podcasts. There are veterans, there are new people in there. There are people that just have ideas that haven't started yet. But having that resource, having that group of people where you could talk to them and bounce ideas, like should I do this in seasons? Should I do episodic episodes? Should I do standalone like how should I move forward? What should my content be? Having those peers to encourage you, especially when you're having trouble, is so helpful.
I mean, you think about, we were talking earlier about working out, Nick, your accountability with your trainer, that is what has gotten you to get past the hump. You think about your Instagram feed or your Facebook feed, so many people are like, I'm on day 1 of my fitness journey. And it's like, I'm on day 2, or I'm on day 1 of my reading a book a month journey, or whatever it is. And then like you fast forward like 2 weeks and you don't see the posts anymore, and they get off track, and it's
you don't see day 14.
It's not like here's day 38 of my fitness journey, And so Nick's starting to see results in his fitness after he hit, kind of like this hump, the boring part, okay, I'm just eating clean and exercising. Now I need to just do this for a while, and then I'm going to get to see a result. And what's really neat about that is this time last year, I was in Italy. I saw a photo of me with my shirt off, and I was like, no, I do not want to look like this. And I did the same thing, and I hired a trainer, and like the first 3 or 4 weeks, you got this momentum and this buzz and this excitement, and if you're doing it, you're looking at the scale and it's changing and stuff. And then like you get kind of into it and it's like, okay, I'm going to keep doing this. And there's this window of time where it's kind of boring, but somewhere around like that 8 or 9 week mark for me, people started noticing, and people were like, hey, did you lose some weight? You're looking healthy. You're looking better. And like then after getting through that dry season, that middle ground is whenever the result gets there. I think so many times with their podcast, Nick, people are like, okay, I'm going to do 20 episodes, and then they stop. But if they would have just went from 20 to 40, that whole benefit of doing all the work, they just didn't see the results in the mirror yet. They didn't see their abs yet, but like they're not paying attention to those little things, and if you're thinking about it with fitness, it's like on the scale, like or with your weight, if you're not paying attention, if you didn't measure things correctly, you might get discouraged. A lot of people, when they're doing their fitness, it's like, I'm just going to see what I weigh. Well, they work out for 2 weeks and they gain 6 pounds of muscle and lose a pound of fat, and they've gained weight, and they're like, wait, I'm fat. But if they would have measured their body fat and they would have measured and done proper measuring to know their statistics, they can see little wins. And so that's what we encourage you, especially in the podcast blueprint course, just about analyzing your data and knowing different data points. But if you don't have, like Nick was saying, these peers, this trainer, this, you don't keep yourself accountable by listening to the podcast or being involved in the group, 2-3 weeks go by and you just were eating whatever and you gained some weight back, or 2 to 3 weeks go by and you forgot to post about your podcast. But that consistency and that accountability through your peers is what's going to take you from just like everybody else to having a thriving podcast.
Yeah, which this leads us, having that community is so important, but this leads us into our next point, which is going to be that consistency compounds. This is one of my favorite things that I have heard over the last couple of years. Is John and I have really been digging into, being podcast hosts and making a living from being podcasters, is that consistency compounds. And what we mean by that is if you have your podcast and you're not consistent with how you release episodes. Let's say 1 week you have this guest on and you're so excited you record on Monday, and so you release it Monday night. And then you don't release another one for 2.5 weeks. And then the next week you're like, oh, I haven't done one in 2.5 weeks, so I'm going to release 3 this week. And so for your listeners, it's so confusing, and you're not building momentum. You're not building anything. People that might have been excited about that episode that you released, but then it was 2.5 or 3 weeks before you released your next one. They're like, what's going on here? Okay, but when you're consistent, and every single Monday, John and I have released a podcast every single Monday for How to Film Weddings for the past almost 2 years now. Every single Monday. For almost 2 years for How to Make a Podcast. We've been doing it for 3 months now. Every single Tuesday, we're releasing a brand new podcast. And what that does is the consistency, you are building trust for your listeners. Our listeners for both of our podcasts know, hey, on Monday, we get a podcast. On Tuesday, we get a podcast. They believe in us. They look forward to it. Well, we think they look forward to it. They might not. I don't know.
To it? More and more of you listen every week.
Yeah. So, look forward to that. And you're just building trust with your listeners. Another demographic that you can be building trust with is also sponsors, right, John?
Ding, ding,
and
ding.
we like sponsors,
Love me a good sponsor.
Right. So you're just proving that if you consistently do something, people are more likely to pay attention to the things that you have to say and the things that you are promoting. If you bring that back to the weight, like the weight training and the getting in shape and that kind of stuff, how many of you have ever decided to really take serious your fitness, and then you get some advice from someone who is obviously not doing the thing that they are preaching? Obviously. Then you're just like, okay, dude, okay, thank you, but I don't care what you have to tell me, because they're not consistent about it and they're not putting in the work and showing you what's going with that. So you build trust with both listeners and sponsors, and people take you more seriously because of that consistency of you putting something out there.
Yeah, and what's really cool about this is whenever you do build this consistency, hopefully you guys that are listening to us and that have kind of joined in, and you're hearing from us, and every Tuesday we're giving you a podcast. It's like on Tuesday you jump in your car and you're like, oh yeah, there's a new episode of How to Make a Podcast. I'm going to download that, or I'm going to jump in that Facebook group because I know that on Thursdays they do a critique thread where you can post your podcast, or just the consistency amongst your whole brand. That lends to credibility. And what happens is it starts getting a flywheel going. And we talk about this in the course. We talk about this in our challenges that we've done. But basically, there's a lot of effort to get that wheel spinning, get it going, get that podcast going. And sooner or later, especially with your health, I remember 5-6 weeks into eating healthy, I just started losing weight. I was just being consistent. And it's my body's okay, we're going to be shedding weight now, I guess. So this is what happens. I get good amounts of water every day. And I was consistent with my food and my water and my sleep. And same thing with your business. It's and with your podcast, it's once that gets going, I mean, for How to Film Weddings, our other podcast, there was like a 6-week period of time this summer where we just had a bunch of batch episodes recorded and we were able to take kind of a break from it. We didn't have to, post as much in our groups, and we're able to step back because of all the work we had put into it. So there's a ton of stuff that comes with consistency and growing. And we want to talk more about like why podcasts fail and actions that we can do. And we're going to do that right after this break. If you have a pulse, you probably hate the subject of taxes and running the bookkeeping portion of your business. But like it or not, if you want to be a successful podcaster, you are going to have to pay attention to your numbers. But don't worry, we have the answer for you, Core Financial. Our friends over at Core Financial have taken the pressure off of us so we can focus on what we love doing most, running our podcast. They take care of all of our taxes, monthly bookkeeping, financial plans, and make sure we take full advantage of all of the tax benefits we qualify for. It just feels good knowing we aren't going to get a big surprise during tax season. If you are serious about building a business with your podcast, head on over to howtomakeapodcast.co/core to see what they can do for you.
So you've got everything you need for your podcast. You've recorded your audio and video. You're so excited, but wait, you don't know how to master the audio or edit the video of your podcast. We know someone who can help, the podcast editors. Picture this. You record both audio and video for your podcast. You upload it to your remote editor, and a few days later, your podcast is ready for you to upload and push to the world. What will you do with your extra time? Connect with sponsors? Grow your Facebook group? Start that project or even course you have dreamed of for months? The possibilities are endless. We are blown away by the podcast editors and love working with them and using their services. They can edit audio, video, or both for your podcast. Don't get stuck trying to do this on your own. Get in touch with the podcast editors today. If you'd like to save 50% off of your first project, head over to howtomakeapodcast.co/thepodcasteditors.
And we are back from break. Today's question of the day is presented by Core Financial. If you need help with your taxes, your business, your money planning, your books, Nick and I both use Core for our own businesses and our podcast. Core Financial, check it out, howtomakeapodcast.co/core. Nick, the question of the day, how can we keep coming up with podcast ideas when we don't know what direction to go?
Yeah, man. Okay. So I remember pretty early on with How to Film Weddings. We were we were probably 30 episodes in or something like that. And I said to John, I was like, man, I'm getting a little bored because it seems like we're having these guests on, we're answering the same questions, we're talking about the same things, and it's just very, very repetitive, right? And John said, his response to me was, did you know that Dave Ramsey is one of the most successful radio hosts, podcast hosts in the country? And did you know that for 30 years, he has literally been answering the same questions every single radio show, every single episode, time in and time out? Like he says, cash, saving money, no debt, and paying with cash. Like that's the thing I'm going to talk about. And everything comes back to that. And so as you're thinking about maybe ways to not fail, you started a podcast for a reason. You had an idea of what it was you wanted to talk about, okay? So the question that I want to ask you right now to help you not fail in the future is, what is your niche? What is that thing that you say, this is what my podcast is about? And you have that umbrella and saying, everything that I talk about in my podcast is in this niche. And if you don't have a niche and you're having problems with, putting out content or something, like, you should figure out what that niche is so that you can continue to talk about that, right? And so with your niche, you have this idea, okay, for How to Film Weddings. Our niche was wedding filmmakers. That's who we wanted to reach. That's who we wanted to talk to. And so our suggestion is for you to build 3 to 5 pillars, okay, that hold up your niche. So for our How to Film Weddings podcast, our 3 pillars are business, shooting, and editing. So everything that we do on that podcast funnels into those 3 different sections: business, shooting, or editing. Probably along the way, we added a fourth pillar, which would be social media, to help wedding filmmakers. But everything we talk about funnels into those things. So what you need to do, you figure out your niche, and then you need to write down what your pillars are, so that you can always come back to something when you're like, man, I just don't know what to talk about. I don't know the things that I should, where to go with my podcast. Come back to your niche, figure out your pillars, and start talking, record, and have everything funnel under that. What do you have to add?
Well, we did the same thing with how to make a podcast, and it really comes down to like production of podcasts, marketing and monetizing your podcast, and analyzing your data for your podcast, and teaching people how to make money with their podcast. And like what's interesting with that is that's home base. And so if Nick and I are like, okay, we need to create some content for our podcast, what we end up doing is we go back through our Facebook group, which is why it's really important to have a Facebook group and have a community, and we see what questions people are asking. We start looking, and we start answering those questions for the community, and say, hey, this is some stuff that maybe we have knowledge on that we could talk about, and then we make sure it kind of fits within those pillars, and it kind of gets you through some of those those blank spaces in your time or whatever. And I think a lot of podcasters think that every episode has to be like the episode but honestly, it kind of goes in ebbs and flows in it. It needs to be like the way that it is set up. It needs to be where you have consistently good information, good entertainment, good stories over time, and that's how you build that audience. It's not just like, okay, I'm going to get one viral episode, and then every episode after that's going to be as big. Some episodes have way more downloads than others for us. Yes.
It's like that episode of The Office whenever Andy becomes boss, and he's like, okay, if you guys do all this stuff, I'll get a tattoo. And, he got the Nard dog on his butt, right? That tattoo. And he had that conversation with Jim, and Jim was like, dude, like, this was a great idea. It got morale up. It's going. And he's like, well, what am I going to do next? And like, I don't know, but you bought some time until you figure out that next thing that you're going to do. And it's kind of like that. You are going to have big episodes that are going to get lots of downloads and people are going to talk about it. But you're also going to have episodes that in comparison are kind of duds. But that's okay if you're just consistently putting out content and you have good nuggets of information in there, good tidbits in there that will help people. And as long as it's falling under that niche and in those pillars, you are on the right track to being consistent with your podcast.
Another thing, if you look at certain podcasts that you really enjoy, like for instance, Dave Ramsey's podcast, I really enjoy. He has it set up to where every single episode or every single day he does 3 hours of radio content, and that's what his podcast is. But within the hour, every time he has somebody come in and do what he calls a debt-free scream, where they are debt-free, they've paid everything off, and they come in and tell their story. And that is like really like when we were building how to film weddings and how to make a podcast, like that's where like we were like, oh, a question of the day. Like he does a question of the day, kind of like a similar to it, but like having things in your podcast that are consistent as well to kind of give you a framework helps you fill in the segments that you need. Mm-hmm. If you think about Jimmy Fallon, or if you think about, all these different people, they have, their monologue at the beginning, and then they have guests on, and then they promote a comedian or a band. And it's like, if you have this framework for your podcast, you can say, okay, like Nick and I were like, we want to talk today about getting through that hump after 15 episodes. And it's like, okay, well, we know we want a question of the day, and we know we want to break halfway through, and we know we want to talk about these 2 points, and it fills in, and it's like, oh, that's good content. That's a good episode. That's good for people. That's going to help them. It's going to help them move further. And it's also just going to keep podcasters excited about growing their podcast. And that's what we're doing with you, and what you should be doing with your listeners. So
Yeah. And then another thing, you have your niche with your pillars, you've written that down, you've created that. Another thing that I think is very helpful is so many times John and I have like messaged each other and we're like, okay, we need to record a podcast today because it's Friday and we have one going out on Monday. This hasn't happened for a really long time, but it's Friday. We have what are we going to talk about? What are we going to do? And we're kind of scrambling to put something together to figure out what it is that we are going to talk about. Okay. So, something that you can do is putting together a content calendar. So the best way to do this is to you have your niche, like write that down at the top, what your niche is. And then maybe you write your pillars so that you can see those, and then just do a brain dump, right? Where you write down every single thing that you could possibly think of to talk about, and you write it all down. And then to take it a step further, you can then go in and label all those ideas. Okay, this one for how to make a podcast is about analyzing your numbers. These ones are about analyzing your numbers. These ones are about, sponsors and monetization and so on and so forth, so that you can kind of figure out, okay, do I want to have 5 episodes in a row about analyzing my numbers? Well, maybe that's not the best idea. So maybe you can kind of then figure out your puzzle, figure out your plan on when you should record episodes and how you should go about them. Write it on a calendar, give yourself a plan. John, this has come up several times over this week where John and I are just talking, but he's like, if we don't give ourselves a deadline, if we don't say, I am going to do this by this point, it just goes, oh, I'll get to that sometime, and it doesn't happen. So by you writing it down and saying, this is my kind of calendar, now be flexible with it. If you happen to book a guest that you've been wanting for a long time, but you already have 2 months of podcast figured out, okay, let's just move the schedule around just a little bit so we can have this guest on. But if you write down ideas, now you've gone from, I don't know what I'm going to talk about next week, to I have skeletons of 3 months of episodes. And that's going to help you so much in not stalling, not whenever you hit a hurdle, not just quitting, but for you to keep drudging along and keep your podcast going.
There are so many times, we're 120 plus episodes into How to Film Weddings and 15 episodes here. So we've almost recorded 150 episodes. And it's like, what could we have talked about for that much time? And, I think back, at the beginning, and there's a lot of the principles that we're talking about that are the same. I think about different podcasts that I watch or listen to that are like Dax Shepard's podcast, his Armchair Expert or whatever. And it's like, it's different every time, but you enjoy listening and hearing who he's interviewing, and you enjoy his, he's very just open about what he's feeling and how that's his shtick. And it's obviously he's a celebrity and has access to celebrities, which is enjoyable. But the idea of the show, the idea of your show, it's like the consistency of that over time and just providing a good listen for people and an enjoyable break from whatever it is that they're doing. That's when you're going, if you've created these systems, if you've created these skeletons, and then you fill them in with the details, and sooner or later, it's just like when you're working out, you're like, wow, I look better. And you look at your numbers and you're like, wow, I got 1,000 downloads. I got 5,000 downloads. And then you can use that momentum to take you to the next level and get that flywheel going. And it's like, okay, well, once I hit 5,000 downloads, I'm going to reach out to my first potential sponsor, or I'm going to, and like Nick was saying, and we've said this a lot, we do a lot of mentor sessions with people, showing them kind of things. And it's like, if you don't set a deadline for something, Nick's going to succeed with his health because he has a measurable goal that has a timeline on it, and he's written it down. You have those 3 things. You measure your goal. If you say, hey, I want to get to this many downloads, or I want to get this much money coming in, and I want to do it by this date. If Nick just said, I'm going to lose 30 pounds, it's like, okay, how, when, where, when is it going to, that's a lot less likely to happen than Nick saying, I'm going to lose 30 pounds in the next 16 months. Then you can say, well, that's a little less than 2 pounds a month. Okay. So that's a half a pound a week. Okay, cool. And so you can measure your way, and you can see this journey ahead. and you can succeed because you don't grow weary in that middle portion of it. So I'm really excited because 15 episodes in for us, for a lot of people, I think 15 episodes in, it's like, oh my goodness, I've ran out of things to say. For us, we feel like we're just getting going, and like we feel like this is still just so brand new. But like if you're out there and you're in that space, whether it's 15 episodes, 5, 10, whatever it is, we hope this episode is really encouraging for you to say, okay, I'm going to look back at this. Is this the direction I want to go? And then I'm just going to keep pushing forward with it.
Another thing that I want to say, and we are, trying to encourage you to keep on going. Okay. I know some of you might be in a spot where you're like, this is taking up way too much time. I am falling behind at work because all I am doing is messing with podcast stuff, or it doesn't bring joy to you anymore. Okay. We do want to let you know that there is no shame in you just hanging it up and saying, you know what, I'm done. That is 100% okay. Like maybe you're not as passionate about it. Maybe it's just not, it doesn't bring you the joy. If it doesn't bring you the joy and, you don't have sponsors, to fulfill contracts or anything like that. Like if it's time to hang up, it's time to hang it up. And that's okay too. We are in this episode, we are talking to people that really want to keep going, but it's hitting that rocky part. It's hitting that difficult part. So there is nothing wrong with saying, okay, I had my time, I'm done.
Yeah. And on the heels of that, like being self-aware, we talk about that a lot, but like being able to look at your show and say, okay, I need to push pause on this show for a minute. I need to rebrand. I need to rethink what I'm doing. I need to download or purchase some courses. I need to get some more information. Gary Vaynerchuk for a long time was just like, hustle, 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 work all day long. And like, he's born to do that. He can work 18 hours a day. I don't thrive that way. So like you have to be self-aware and say, okay, what John and Nick are saying, I get this, and I'm going to apply it to my situation uniquely because we don't know every single one of you. But like, if you look back at your show and you look and you're like, man, something's just off. I'm not doing this right. I'm not enjoying it. I'm going to push pause and give yourself a deadline to have a rebrand or say, I'm going to have a different podcast or I'm just done. Like, that's okay. Definitely okay.
Yeah. So anyways, I think this has been, I've enjoyed talking about this. Hopefully this episode has been really encouraging to you, listener, especially kind of if you're in a phase where you're like, man, I just don't know where to go with our podcast. Those couple of actual steps about making some pillars and creating a content calendar, that is really going to help you moving forward with your podcast. One thing we want you to do before we hop off here is head over to howtomakeapodcast.co. There we have John, I forgot what it's called. What's the thing that has all the information about your podcast so you can sell sponsors? I totally forgot the name of it.
I'm going to let you. I know what the press kit's called, but I'm not going to say it.
There you go. You're not okay. If you head over to howtomakeapodcast.co/shop, you can pick up our press kit. There, it is a ton of information. It's a Photoshop template that you can download and you can make your own, so that you can then present that information to potential sponsors. You're showing them that you're being consistent. You are showing the numbers that you are getting, and then from there, hopefully you can sell some ad space or something like that to potential sponsors. Again, that is our press kit. Sorry about the flub.
I love it.
It was really good. I think we're going to run an ad on that. Yeah. So thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of the podcast. John, it has been great hanging out with you. And until next time, we will see you.
See you guys.